What's up, homies? It's This Week in Mormons, the premier Latter-day Saint focused podcast with news and intrigue and all kinds of fun stuff. We're glad you're here this week. Thanks for joining us. Please go to thisweekinmormons.com and wherever you're getting this podcast, if there's a subscribe button, hit it, okay? So you'll always get an update when there's a new episode and you can listen to it and make it part of your life. I'm the founder of your show, Jeff Openshaw.
And I'm the Robin to Jeff's Batman, Devin Thorpe.
Hello, Dick Grayson. You might die in some of those series, especially if you're Zack Snyder.
Good to be here.
Yeah, how you doing, Devin? What's going on?
Thrilled to be here. Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
What is happening in northern Florida?
A lot of warm weather. This is our first summer here, and I'm thrilled that we are surviving it. I was a little nervous, but the bugs. Here it is, July 11th as we're recording this. Is that July 11th? And
Yeah.
We've survived so far. No bugs have eaten us. The alligator in the pond next door has not eaten us. And
still there, though? That's what you're saying.
It's still there, yes. I actually get out and run. I run in the evening now instead of running in the morning because it's too hot in the morning. But when the sun is gone, I can go run and I enjoy it. So it's all good. It's all good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good deal. Well, good deal. All is fine here. Busy weekend on the Openshaw front. We had my son's my oldest son had his birthday. It's basically been an entire celebratory weekend for him.
How old is he?
He just turned 7. So
okay, year to go.
Many of you will remember 7 years ago, if you heard the show, when Al frantically found an extra co-host and subbed in, and they spent a long time wondering, just making fun of my kid's name and all kinds of stuff. Great episode. Maybe we'll link to it in the show notes. It was a good time.
Yeah, you should link to that for sure.
That was fun.
You got to bring us up to date.
No, it was good. The kid had a party with some of his school friends. I got to wear a swim cap and goggles while they put shaving or whipped cream and goldfish on my head and allowed children with like pull volume squirt guns to shoot it off your head. And when you're seeing that at point blank range, like the glee on kids' faces to be able to do this to an adult without negative repercussions, that was a lot of fun. So we had a pretty good time with all that. So it's fun. And today, awesome. Actually, we all went hiking out in Shenandoah National Park. I'd probably only been home for about an hour by the time you and I have been talking here. It just got cleaned up because I was a big stinky mess from hiking miles to see waterfalls and hoping to see bears, but never seeing them and all kinds of stuff.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. And we successfully wore out 3 little boys who are extremely tired and
that's great
and grumpy. Many of you can sympathize with this. We stopped over. If you've ever been to Shenandoah, over at Skyland, which is this like inn, this kind of hotel area that's actually up at around 3,500 feet up near the top of the park in the middle of it. And we stopped there because you can get ice cream from this little stand inside near the restaurant area. And so we got ice cream. Like we didn't get enough for all 5 of us, like each person to get a scoop. We just got 3 and shared a little bit. And my son, my oldest, the birthday boy, mostly just ate one by himself. And then the 2 other ones had to share chocolate. And because they were so tired and wiped out, this was this like vicious fight with screaming and crying. I mean, this happens with kids. I was mostly just laughing because I'm watching them have like just full blown emotional breakdowns, like collapsing in tears because they keep taking the chocolate from one another. And I know it's just because they're wasted. That's all. It was fine. It was not bad. I'm mostly to myself laughing and just looking at other passersby saying, sorry to interrupt your solitude up here in the mountains.
Yeah,
but,
that's beautiful country though. Beautiful.
No, it was great. It was a really fun day. I'm beat, but it was a good time, and it was nice, man.
Glad you enjoyed that.
That was great. National parks are fun. Also fun, yes, friends. Lots going on in the world of Latter-day Saint news. We got plenty to get into today. Weird garbs, church musicians, new church restoration sites, status of the church in some African countries, which is pretty interesting. And also, like, what language should we speak at church? To say not amongst some other things. So I think we're going to have a fun little discussion this week as we're with you for the next little while. So we hope you'll stick with us the whole time. And with that said, I don't know how we should get into it, Devin. I mean, there's a lot going on, but I think I'll just go with one of my favorite ones personally. As a musician who is not enough of a musician to be picked on for church service, i.e. I don't play piano well enough to be needed for things, unlike my siblings who do and get tapped to do things like this all the time. We've got an article here by Common Consent from Gail Homer Berry, who talks about how she's served in ward and stake music roles since she was 12 years old. And if you are a musician who is capable of playing piano in particular, like the joy of serving, but you know the pain in that you are often called upon, ad hoc, without notice, assigned, all sorts of things, with people just assuming you could do it because you're the musician, with little regard to kind of the fact that this is also a skill set. This is something you want to regard as a calling, as a way of worship. It's
Yeah.
very easy to just be kind of called on and dumped on when you are a musician in the church. And the article is essentially about that. I love the initial story she leads off with, saying when she was 14, she was walking out of church to go home and break her fast when the missionaries pounced on her and asked her to play piano for a baptism starting in 15 minutes. And her mom just kind of said, "Okay," and then she let her stay there. And she said during the baptism she started to shake because she was hungry and her blood sugar was low because she was going to break her fast. And then of course the missionaries came and asked her to do the same thing again, even though she said she's like, next time give me a week's notice so I can plan about this. And then of course missionaries love them, but being missionaries did not heed that request and just came and like dumped on her again, the next time around, and just asked for some quick help. That's a whole different topic, but I have seen missionaries
Yeah.
fail to have common sense and provide adequate time more times than I can possibly
Yeah.
count. And I don't know if it's an age thing, maturity thing, whatever, but that's obviously a thing. So the gist of it though is kind of like she's lecturing on standards we should have for musicians. And there's too many of these to read. She has 20 points overall, but I will read a few of them that I think are worthwhile and worth considering. And it kind of speaks to callings in general and how we should relate to folks and encourage them to serve. She stresses like musicians are people, not machines. You cannot turn them on and off at will. Musicians, being people, get tired, hungry, and cranky. They can't just like perform all the time whenever you want. Prayer is wonderful and can enhance but not replace practice. I love that one because I've seen many people just say like, well, okay, I'm basically not a believer in, this is me, Devin, but I'm not a believer in the
Mm-hmm.
notion that like someone who's not prepared or doesn't know how to play is up there praying or playing, and we will still feel the spirit through bad performances. Like maybe you could, but by and large, I think you're going to feel the spirit more from those who prepare and share their talents in a proper
Sure.
way than just giving everyone carte blanche to do what they want and winding up with iffy musical numbers that I don't think are always as great.
Yeah.
She talks about the different kinds of keyboardists to consider, all kinds of things. Basically, how to ask politely. Don't just assume. Don't just assign. That's one down the line where she talks about like the stake president might just say, "The stake president wants you to play organ for state conference. Please be on the stand 15 minutes early for the prelude." Or say the stake president was wondering if you're available to play for the next state conference. If you are, can you please play 15 minutes of prelude music? That I've seen so much, and I'm sure you have in your life, Devin, that we just like, we want to assign people because we want to be bold. We want to give them an opportunity to serve, and sometimes we do just
Mm-hmm.
want to assign people, but the verbiage you use can make a big difference in whether people are excited to participate or whether they feel put out and kind of taken advantage of in many ways with calling. So anyway, good article. We'll link to it. You should read it. But I like the reminders to kind of, respect the musicians among us. We could respect all the callings among us, but the musicians among us are not just machines that you turn off and on. They are people who have talents and abilities that need to be considered and appreciated as we use them in our worship and serving the Lord. There we go.
Yeah. This is this is a great article, and I really hope every bishop reads it. And having served in as a counselor in a couple of situations, I wish I had read it before because it drives home repeatedly in thoughtful ways the ways in which we subtly um, insult and offend the musicians in our wards by giving them too little credit and asking too much of them.
And
Uh,
sometimes not giving them enough notice. Like I've seen it a lot
yeah,
when
exactly.
a leader might say they want to change the hymn, and sometimes even if it's enough, like you send them a text or say, "Hey, I think we want to change this one right now. Is that okay?" That's fine, but you've seen it from the pulpit many times. Like, no, let's sing this hymn instead. Let's change it up. And too often we think the organist is someone who's like, oh, okay, I can just up and do that. Like, do I have that sight
Yeah,
reading ability or do I know all the hymns? And luckily many do, but
yeah,
we forget that many organists who are given the hymns to play each week have worked with the music leader and they've worked with them in advance and said, here's the hymns we're going to play Sunday. And they've practiced those ones to
all week.
do. Yes.
Yeah.
And so if you mix that up and just drop changes on them, it shouldn't be expected that they can just roll with it.
Yeah, yeah, that is so true and so hard to remember. I say hard to remember. It, I have often forgotten it, and so I imagine that many other people have as well. That they assume that if you can play one hymn, you can play them all, which is kind of ridiculous because I would pound the table and tell you I cannot play the piano, but there was a time I could uh, play a pretty good rendition of "We Thank Thee, O God, for a Prophet."
Nice.
Um, and then the church published a new hymnal and changed the key, and I can no longer play "We Thank Thee, O God, for a Prophet" in the new key, and I gave up the piano. Anyway, yeah, it was beyond me to figure out how to play it in the new key. Anyway, yes, I should be much more sensitive as someone who studied piano for 6 years, only to finally conclude that he couldn't play.
Yeah.
Um,
I see in the
but
comments here a lot of like the general idea of like not being afraid to push back. Um, which I think is good. I don't think it's like we want to be belligerent in the face of opportunities to serve, but it's a good reminder that sometimes we can like push back or say, no, you haven't given me enough notice to do this. Like you need to be considerate about what we're doing.
yeah,
We were talking before this, and I kind of wonder if broadly, are we seeing more pushing back in general, not just music callings, but in the church? Like I know more people I feel like
yeah,
who are comfortable rejecting callings than they perhaps were many
yeah.
years ago. I haven't been around as long as you, Devin,
Yeah. I've been
but
wrong.
still, I get that impression.
It's tough to know because there are differences in places and wards and circumstances, but it does feel to me like, in general, there is a little greater likelihood that if a bishop says to anyone in the ward, "Would you be willing to accept this calling?" the odds of a yes are lower in 2022 than they were in, say, 1972. I think probably a lot lower, not dramatically.
Mhm.
But I would say, if I'm guessing, I'm going to put numbers to this, and it's a little absurd, but I would say in '72, if you said the bishop sat you down and said, "Would you be willing to serve as a primary teacher?" That something like 75% of people would have said yes, and that in 2022, 50 years later, the answer probability of a yes is below 50%.
You think it's
So
that
it's
low?
yeah, yeah,
And primary is a difficult example because I think it's one of the harder ones to accept for many
yeah,
because it's a difficult calling. It requires a lot of patience with kids. It's pretty thankless, honestly, and you're kind of siloed off too from the rest of the ward. And that's a tough calling.
yeah, yeah,
I revere primary workers because they've got a lot on their plate.
yeah,
It's tough to do. I've done it a couple of times. I mean, like when we first got married, it was almost like the default in the ward. If you were a newer couple who'd got married and moved in, they just put you in primary. It was just a thing. I'm sure
yeah.
that our ward was not the only one to kind of do this.
Right. Yeah,
The upside was we were sort of with a lot of other newishly married types who didn't even have kids yet, and we were kind of our own clique in that sense. Like we had a support
yeah,
group, and we had friends that we stayed our friends and are still our friends today. Um, yeah, here to the primary people. Here's one
yeah,
funny
yeah,
comment. There's a lot of great comments on this article, and I just wanted to point this one out here that it says our church's practice of having a chorister for congregational singing is unusual among churches. And that is kind of true if you think about it. Not every church does it that way. I mean, some churches have worship bands, which is a whole other thing. But
yeah,
it's not always common if it's not a choir singing to have a director up there conducting the music for the ward. I mean, it's in the handbook, it mentions it, but it's also, I think, largely just born out of tradition.
mm-hmm.
And I think for the most part, I wouldn't. I think you could have someone just playing organ and nobody conducting, and there are a few situations where something's going to go off the rails, and the hymn will not be sung well or appropriately. I mean, half the time you have a battle between a chorister and the organist to make like
Yeah,
if the chorister has like a certain tempo in mind and the organist isn't doing it, you're like, come on, your job is to follow me.
yeah.
I am the conductor. Everyone follows the conductor.
And
Um,
there's an interesting thing about tempo. Let me interject this. I'm sorry, I apologize,
no,
but
you're good.
I was visiting an Episcopal Christmas celebration with my son and daughter-in-law, a couple of years back, and I was shocked. Shocked. I mean, literally shocked. I literally could not keep up with singing the Christmas carols at a proper tempo, right? Because you had professional musicians performing, right? And in the ward, we're accustomed to uh, whoever is willing to play on Sunday, and our tempos have slowed over the years. And in general, I would say we play hymns slower. But I was just shocked. I literally couldn't sing at pace with the hymns. It was so fast.
That is fascinating. I haven't thought
Yeah,
about that. Yeah.
yeah,
Dun, dun,
yeah,
dun, 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 dun,
yeah.
dun, dun, dun. Yeah. So
I wish we had. I wish we were a little more forward thinking about our music in church too. But that's a discussion for another day. We
it
need
might
to get
change. I
you,
mean,
like we need you on your guitar in church for crying out loud. Maybe even the electric guitar. Let's bring some energy. Let's bring
I
some
would
passion,
I would
some
love to.
joy to the
Yes,
sacrament meeting.
I would love to rock for Jesus. I'm down.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we talk about that as being somehow disrespectful, but what that is inclusive.
Question:
It
Can
seems
I
like to me.
play Master of Puppets like Eddie from Stranger Things? Can I do that?
I don't know.
You don't.
I don't know
Well,
what that song is. I should know. I don't, but
I
I'm
don't
not
understand
cool
the
like you,
question, and I
Jeff.
won't respond to it.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to listen to this and look it
Well,
up later.
well, Devin, I think you are aware of this, but I'm hopeful that there was that handbook update a number of months ago, might have even been late last year,
Uh-huh.
that changes some of the rules around music. It used to have very expressly forbidden types of instruments, and those are gone now, and
Yeah.
it's much more up to bishop's
Oh.
interpretation and feeling about what's
Oh, that's
appropriate.
good.
And so I think
Well,
it'll take time,
dude,
but it might open up
jam.
doors eventually over time for people to be more comfortable with other
Yeah.
types of music, because you can do all kinds of things. Kurt and I were even talking on the podcast the other week that, like, there's nothing that says even sacrament meeting has to be structured the way it is. It encourages you to follow a certain maybe format, but it's not even says it's required. You could start
Yeah.
with special musical numbers while people are walking in. You can mix it up all, do whatever you want.
Right.
You could start with speakers. You could have a speaker, the announcements, then the sacrament, then another speaker, and
Yep.
then a musical number. But do whatever you want. Then in the meeting, you can do anything you want. All right.
That is a good reminder, and
Thank
I'm
you.
thrilled about that because I would love to see more guitars in church. I think I've seen maybe in 57 years I can remember maybe 4 guitars in sacrament meeting, and I remember beforehand I was in the ward council and the bishop said, "There's going to be a guitar in sacrament meeting. I don't want to hear about it. Please do not give me any grief." I'm paraphrasing heavily, but that was his message, unequivocally, because that was back in the olden days before 3 months ago when the handbook clearly said no guitars in sacrament meeting.
Yeah.
But
I've
so
seen
I
them
think
though
they're great.
too. I think a
Yeah,
tasteful, like I've seen like a tastefully done, like classical guitar duo up there playing a hymn. It's beautiful. It's
yeah,
wonderful.
oh
Why would you
yeah,
not want that? It's great.
yeah.
All right, moving on.
Okay, okay. So I had to grab something here.
Evan's choice.
Let's talk about Joseph Smith's house in Kirtland. About a decade ago, the church bought a home that had been owned by Joseph Smith back in the Kirtland era of the church. He lived there for about 5 years. The church bought it for $128,000,
Oh,
and they've spent
nothing.
nothing. And they've spent the last decade largely trying to figure out what the home originally looked like, or maybe not originally, but when Joseph Smith lived in it. And I think they feel like they've got that figured out as much as they can. And so they are now in the process of restoring it. So they stripped off a big addition that had been added to the back, and they're changing the roof line to make it conform to what it was originally.
Uh-huh.
And just generally, I think it's a great addition to what is already, spectacular in the Kirtland area. The church has really done a lot with the Kirtland and Palmyra area historical sites over the years. And I say this over the years because I've now visited them multiple times across time and seen some big changes. And so, it's sort of like, I don't want to dramatize, but it's almost like Disneyland. I mean, it's that level of professionalism, just
Yeah.
fabulous stuff. So you go and it's free, and it is absolutely professional in every respect.
It's good to see
Great
them
stuff.
doing that. I guess in my mind, I don't ever think of Kirtland like having the same level of impact as places like Palmyra or Nauvoo or anything around Kansas City, Independence, wherever, Liberty. It's glad to see them investing even more in the Kirtland area. I haven't been up there. I haven't been to Kirtland. I haven't
Yeah,
been to Temple or anything. I have to think. I often wonder how often the church has lobbied the Community of Christ to sell the Kirtland Temple back,
yeah.
or just sell it to us. We've purchased some other things from them in recent years. Hans Mill was out of our possession until the past
Oh,
handful of
really?
years, and now we have it. So, but the Kirtland Temple, that's one of those kind of crown jewels. I mean, that's one of those things
Yeah,
where I imagine they wouldn't even make it in a press release. This would come out of this would be President Nelson announcing it near the end of General Conference and saying,
right.
before I
Yeah,
announce new temples, I'd like to note that we have successfully purchased the Kirtland Temple
yeah,
from the community. Like that, it's
yeah,
that level, I think, that would
yeah.
happen.
I think
But
the way it's got to happen is with a third party intermediary. Someone's got to buy it and donate it to the church
that's a
because
fair point. Where's all the billionaire Mormons? I mean, I
yeah,
don't know what the rate would be for the Kirtland Temple. Like, I'm sure there's a market rate, but then there's a huge inflated markup because the Community of Christ would know how
yeah,
badly we want it. So I get
yeah,
that, but it's not a
yeah,
massive building. Um,
yeah,
it's not made
and
of all the finest materials like things today. Because the average
yeah,
temples cost a lot of money if you build new ones today. So I'm
yeah,
curious what it would actually cost, like market value.
yeah. I think it would be a big number for just because of the premium that you're talking about.
Yes.
But but I think it is a number that is within the reach of any billionaire. That's my feeling. It would because the Church of Community of Christ is sufficiently small that it would not have to be $1 billion. It would be something under $1 billion that would make them go, "Holy crap! We could really think of all the good we could do with that money, especially if we are promised continued access to the temple or something."
Yeah.
Uh,
So let's check this out. This is a website. I don't know how accurate this website is. This is just the CPI inflation calculator, officialdata.org.
mm-hmm.
But the Kirtland Temple was dedicated in 1836. And they said it cost about $40,000 in 1836 dollars. Inflated to today, it says it is 1.25 I said million dollars,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
still seems shockingly low. Temples cost way
yeah,
more than that when they build them new today,
yeah,
10 times that, if not
yeah,
more.
yeah.
Um,
Even little ones like Kirtland. Yeah,
I mean, that's what it costs, historical stuff, but I have to imagine, I can't see that. I mean, anyways, it's just total speculation on our part. I just have no idea what
yeah,
the Community of
yeah,
Christ would say it's actually worth for a fair
yeah.
market value, but I can't
I think
imagine
it's
it's
a
worth
nine-figure number.
nine
Yeah.
figures. Nine
Yes.
figures.
Yes.
I want to be clear how many nine is. You think we're talking in the hundreds of millions of dollars
Yes.
to
Yes.
obtain the Kirtland Temple. I don't
Yes.
think it is worth that much money. I could understand the
No.
desire to push us to have that much money,
Yeah.
to spend that much money.
Yeah. I think the community of Christ won't part with it unless someone, and that's why the church can't do it, right? The church, the LDS Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, could easily stroke that check, but there'd be too much criticism. It has to be a wealthy donor that steps up and says, "I will pay so much money that the Church of Christ can't say no. The Community of Christ can't say no, and then Shazam, that temple becomes property of the church by virtue of that rebel billionaire donating it. That's I've
Well,
long believed that is true.
Well, according to this other website here,
Mm-hmm.
moneyinc.com, don't take it with a grain of salt, but this lists
Mm-hmm.
the 10 richest Mormons in the world. You've got the founder of
Okay.
JetBlue, David Nealman, who's worth 400
Yeah.
million. Carlos Wizard Martins, who I don't know who that is, but
Yeah.
he's worth $1 billion. John Huntsman's $1 billion. Jim Jannard's worth $1 billion. Roger W. Sant is worth 1.7 billion. Richard Taylor Peary, 1.7. Richard Marriott, 1.8 billion. J. Willard Marriott, 1.9. Sid Bass, 1.9, and James L. Sorensen, who develops and markets medical devices. He sold the company Abbott Labs, which you might have heard of if you
Yeah.
tried to buy baby formula in recent years.
Yeah.
He sold it and made billions in the process and has Sorensen Media, but he's allegedly worth $3.4 billion.
But
That
he has now passed away. This is old
Okay,
data.
that's old
This
data.
is
Let's see if
yeah.
we've got one from 2021, the richest Latter-day Saints, according to
Okay.
This is Weekend Mormon. I'm sorry. It's still listed. He must have barely passed away. We said he died in
No.
2008, but he was worth 4.5 billion. And most of the other ones you got, the
Yeah.
ones we already read, and I don't see much in the way of any
And then the guy that
variation.
just bought the Jazz, Ryan Smith, right? That's his name.
I think so.
He's a
Yeah.
billionaire. He's a
Yeah.
billionaire.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure he's LDS. I think he's still a church going member.
And then we've got, like Willard Mitt Romney, who's worth about half a billion, according to
Mm-hmm.
more recent estimates. So, folks, what we're saying is we could even start it as some kind of a consortium, a nonprofit,
That's right.
something, by the Kirtland Temple. And if who doesn't want the tax write off, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this could be done. Why is
Yep.
this so
Could
hard
be
for you
done.
people? Make our dreams a reality. Anyone listening in the sound of my voice. One person who is probably not listening about this is a wonderful man from the country of Mali named Samake. Longtime listeners of the show might have heard that name before of Samake. Who is Samake? He is, or Samake, I believe. I've always said it incorrectly. Um, he is from the West African nation of Mali, which is largely an Islamic country, but he is a convert to the church. And it is by most markers, I think back when he ran for president, I think back in, it was either 2010 or 2012, early days of TWIM that we talked
I
about
think
this.
maybe both, but I
Might
could
have
be
been
wrong.
both. He believed he and his family were the only Latter-day Saints in the country at the time. He had experienced, he joined when he was stateside. And obviously now, because of
Mm-hmm.
this, he has ties to Utah. He spent much of COVID actually stuck in Utah, unable to return to Mali. Long and short of it, though, he got back in the country. Mali's a bit of a sad story because it had been a pretty successful-ish democracy in terms of like peaceful transitions of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
But then they had a military coup a couple of years ago, and it forced their controversial president to resign. Um, Sometimes you have military coups who say this is a mess, so we want to have free and fair elections, and they hop in and do that, and then step off again. But sometimes a military coup is just, it can go any way when a military coup happens. Allegedly, they'll be having another election in 2024, and he announced his candidacy once more to run for president, which still makes me hopeful that the world's first head of state, who would be a Latter-day Saint, could somehow come from Mali of all places. How awesome would
Yeah.
that be? Just like,
Yeah.
yep, we make all this big deal when Mitt Romney runs for president, and like 1/3 of Republicans are uncomfortable voting for a Latter-day Saint for president,
Yeah.
for a number, and probably Democrats too, for that matter. But no, we're just going to get the guy in Mali, the Muslim country, and he'll be the one. So I know that
Yeah.
he didn't pull super great back when he ran before. So I think we like to
Yeah.
jump on this as a story because it's interesting to us as Latter-day Saints. But I don't know if
Yeah.
he's as much of an actual figure in Malian politics as we would like to
I've
assume.
got to think his name is building in recognition. I met him back in 2012 ish. Yeah, it was 2012 or 2013. Seems like a really nice guy. Um, we have not stayed in touch, uh, but he seems like a sharp guy.
I mean, so this is how he did here. So he ran on the 2013 Malian presidential election. Was not one of the top vote getters by any stretch of the imagination. You actually look down here. He is, for his Party for Civic and Patriotic Action, he received in the first round 0.58% of the vote.
0.58.
0.58% of the vote,
Yeah.
0.58% of the vote. Whereas in the first round, a lot of countries do runoffs. We don't do those as much in the United
Right.
States. And that, like, the top two vote getters, when there's a lot of people running, will then proceed
Mm-hmm.
to a runoff when it's just those two. But in
Yeah.
this case, you had the top two vote getters were almost 40% and 20%, and then everyone else was way down there. So Mr. Samake, was not
He wasn't
a
a
major
legit.
force.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, cool
Well,
stuff though.
that is interesting. Kind of related to politics. Of course, the church's thoughts on abortion are top of mind right now because of the Supreme Court's recent ruling on abortion, ending the Roe v. Wade uh, ruling that had defined the right to an abortion during the first 24 weeks as a constitutional right.
Oh, did that
Um,
happen?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it did. Yes.
I'm kidding.
So, yes, of course. So
I don't
the
think Devin knows that I'm
yes,
joking. I'm like, Devin,
yes,
I did not mean
yeah.
this.
It's, well, you oversold it, or maybe you undersold it. Sorry, I apologize.
No,
But
no,
yeah,
no.
so
I'm dry humor all the way, so don't worry about it.
yeah, that's good. So the church did announce new clarity on its thinking about abortion.
Yes.
And it offered kind of two new uh, elements of guidance that were called out in an article in the Tribune, at least. And the first is that members of the church may, they're not required to or expected to, but they may engage in political action in order to protect life. Note that it does not say whose life is to be protected, and religious liberty. So we can be engaged in political discussions around this, and it appears, at least to my reading, that the language does not, strictly speaking, put Mormons on one side or the other of the issue. And then the other thing that I thought was a bigger change, the article in the Tribune mentioned this only in passing, but I think this is a very big deal. The policy of the church has been something close to, I forget the language, but something close to that if you're going to have an abortion, a woman is expected to counsel with the bishop beforehand. And the new language is that she may counsel with her bishop. Uh,
Yeah.
and so there's no requirement, which I think is good because when a Latter day Saint woman chooses to have an abortion, generally speaking, that's not going to be a sin. She's going to be choosing that because the pregnancy is failing, because her health is at risk, because it was incest or rape, but because it qualifies, and there should be no need expressly for a woman to counsel with her bishop to not sin. But it should also be welcome in the case that a woman wants to counsel with her bishop to have the
Mhm.
comfort that might come from having the bishop say, well, yes, I agree. Your life is in jeopardy. You need to have this pregnancy terminated, for instance. So I thought that was an interesting and meaningful change in the policy that shows greater respect to women in the church.
I like that. You also
So,
linked before we were talking about this a little bit of an older, well, not super old, but from like last 2 weeks, asking
mhm.
did these LDS women have abortions? Because the definition of abortion can be tricky. It's not, it's easy
Yeah,
to kind of get sucked into the whole idea that it's like, yeah, well, you're willfully terminating a pregnancy because you don't want it or this or that. But sometimes, and depending on the state you're in and all number of criteria, an abortion can mean a lot of things that are not what you might typically expect. I mean, and
yeah,
that can be very tricky, and that's where it gets very tricky right now in the United States with where this is going, where we might
yeah,
wind up on this issue on a state by state basis, and we don't exactly know. But some of these
yeah,
stories are just gut wrenching, honestly.
yeah,
Like this woman of Emily Miller who found herself kind of in this in between place. She was in Idaho rather. She was 19 weeks pregnant when she discovered her and her husband's prayed for baby had a form of dwarfism that was later confirmed to be lethal, and she still hung on to the pregnancy because she couldn't just like make that decision to essentially have to end the baby's life, the fetus's life, whatever you want to call it. But the child's development began to put her own life as risk. And so he was born eventually and given oxygen and he lived for 32 minutes. And it says, like right here that they held him. He got a blessing from his father before he passed on. And many might see that like, well, that's a touching story of a very difficult situation. But what you have to remember is given the time frame when this happened, in some places that's also considered an abortion and that could become illegal in
yeah,
some instances, and it varies place to place. Or this other story
sure.
afterwards of this woman Julie Michaud, who basically by the time frame and by the choice essentially aborted the kid, but the kid was like still alive and they did everything to keep it alive. So her daughter was lived for 7 months. So in this weird place, she considers that she aborted the child and then it still lived for 7 months. And it's like, well, like what do you say to that? And you just have to remember that
Yeah,
there's a lot of shading going on here, a lot of shades in between. It's not black and white,
yeah,
and it's hard. On the cheeky side of it, this has nothing to do with Latter Day Saints, but I don't know if you saw in the news the other day, because of Texas's new law, a woman in Texas took the high occupancy lane on the freeway and got a ticket for being by herself, and then she's suing back and saying, no, under Texas law, this is like a living human with me.
Right.
And so there's two of us in this car as far as the state of Texas is concerned. And
Yeah.
so I am suing you can see it being kind of like a,
Right. It is,
a
clearly,
vanity thing.
this is a political thing, but
It's a publicity
it's
stunt in a way for the issue,
yeah,
but it
yeah,
does raise questions, right? Like I
yeah.
could
Right.
also
Oh,
see the argument
it's
for it.
this is so fraught. The those who are most um, strenuously pro-life point out correctly that there are very few abortions each year because of rape or incest.
Yeah.
But it is heartbreaking to think about forcing them to have a child. And there is a widely reported, though I haven't checked the documentation to see if it's legitimate, but I read repeated references to a 10-year-old girl whose father impregnated her in a state that no longer allows abortion. And so in her state, she was expected to carry that child.
Yeah.
I understand that what has happened is she did leave the state to get an abortion, but just heartbreaking to think that you would expect a 10-year-old girl to have a child that was conceived as a result of incest. I mean, just
Yeah, which is
unthinkable,
it's unthinkable in and of itself, and it's beyond me. There would be areas where there would not be carve outs for that,
Yeah, yeah,
which is just crazy. I mean, yeah, it's just absolutely nuts. Um, if we can pivot to be on the somewhat cheekier side of family life
yes,
and planning and things like that,
yes,
I'm simply loving that this is not even like a story of anything that happened. This popped up in my Facebook feed, so I shared it with our TWIM audience. There's the Nauvoo Supply Company. They sell all
yeah,
sorts of various textiles and other wares
yeah. Like the
that
CTR hat.
churchy themed. You can get all kinds of different things, and the one that popped up in my feed was a shirt that is the Proclamation T-shirt for the Proclamation on the Family, and they took the Family Proclamation and plastered it onto a T-shirt, repeating itself
The whole thing.
the whole thing, and like repeating when it
Yeah,
ends, it just starts again and just carries over the whole shirt. And you can have that shirt if that's something you're into. Um,
yeah.
and I think that's fine. Sure. To each their own, I suppose. So, of course, I went to
Yeah,
their website to find any of the other things. I can't quite peg down the nature of this company, to be perfectly honest. As far as is this done in a very tongue-in-cheek way, especially because they have a lot of Brigham Young paraphernalia that shows Brigham Young wearing sunglasses and looking kind of sassy. You can get swim trunks that have Brigham, as one of our as one of our followers wrote. Um, I had more concern about wearing swim trunks with Brigham Young on my thigh and back end than anything else. And so that part of it I don't
yeah,
fully get. I'm mixed up here as far as, are they thinking they are funny? Are they not funny? Is it supposed to be funny? Are they super hardcore in the church? Is this a sincerity play? I have no idea. But
yeah,
and they're really leaning into Brigham Young with the baseball cap and the sunglasses.
yeah. I like the Forever Young sticker there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Zion Noise, make some. Psalm
yeah.
100. Maybe they're just trying to be cool. They're just being cool moes. Randomly, you can also buy an Imagine Dragons shirt. But it's funny because it
That
says,
makes
oh
sense.
no, I'm sorry. It says Imagine Wagons, 1847 Mormon Pioneer Trek shirt. I got that. I'm sorry. I missed that one.
Yeah, I
Deseret State of
actually,
Mind.
yeah, I what's the name of the lead singer for Imagine Dragons?
Dan Reynolds.
Dan Ritz. I had him in my house, and I interviewed him for my podcast right in my own living room.
That's
That was
cool.
one of my cool ones. Yeah, that was a fun one to do.
Well, there
Uh,
you go. So folks,
so yeah,
if you
sorry,
want to
that
buy
was
these things,
irrelevant.
I should probably set up like affiliate links and things like that so you can buy stuff from the Nauvoo Supply Company, which I've yet to do. So just
Yeah,
do you. Enjoy
you stay up
yourself.
late. Stay up late tonight, Jeff. Get that ready. Um, you, Jeff, had suggested we chat about this anglicization, yeah, of the church,
Yeah.
which is an interesting thing. The article attributes the beginning of this trend to President Harold B. Lee, right?
Let's back up for 1 second though. Define anglicization. Like, what are we talking about? What trend?
So the trend of doing everything in the church in English.
Ah,
And so it comes back to, yeah, Harold B. Lee in 1973 said at a conference in Munich how helpful it would be if everyone now speaking your own native tongue would learn to speak English. Then you would be able to talk with us more clearly and we could understand you better than we have done. And you pointed out that there are lots of ways to think about this. And
oh
one, of
sure.
course, initial reaction is to think about how selfish that is. But at the same time, it is impossible to expect the prophet of the church to be able to speak every language or to assume that there will be effective translation always available. And so, encouraging the saints to learn English, to be proficient in order to speak, church English well enough to raise the issues with general authorities, I think that's not altogether crazy.
Yeah.
And we've all experienced some of the benefits of that traveling around the world. If any of us have served missions or otherwise traveled and visited Latter Day Saints, like I've spent time in the church office in Moscow, and it's really nice that even the Russians there generally speak English, and you can have a conversation with them.
Yeah, we're
So
very spoiled for choice as North Americans, as citizens of the United States, because not just because of our church itself, but just the realities of global politics and the global economy and all number of things. English is an extremely valuable language to know. Downside to it, of course, unrelated to church as well, is that a lot of Americans were pretty bad at learning other languages because I think we've been able to like just relax and say, well, everyone else is going to learn ours. Why do I have to try? Uh,
yeah,
which is funny because nowadays, if you can't speak Mandarin, you often get a lot of competitive advantages in the business world and also
oh yeah,
in the political world. I
yeah,
can't tell you how many jobs there are,
yeah,
and it's much easier to get them if you have Arabic, Russian, or Mandarin proficiency. You're a much hotter target for employment than you are if you speak something like Spanish, like I do. You know how many people speak
yeah.
Spanish? Like I'm not.
Everybody,
It's nice that I do, but I am not a novel product here
yeah.
or anything like
Yeah,
that.
it does not alter our career trajectory because you and I speak Spanish, but
It
it would
does
if
not.
we spoke
I keep
Chinese.
hoping if Catalonia ever gets its independence, though, and then we have to open an embassy in Catalonia.
Then
The number of Americans who speak Catalan much smaller. I'm really hoping I can hop on that bandwagon somehow and
there you
really
go.
be a part. Make me they'll make me
Yeah.
the charge d'affaires or something. Uh, I am with you on all the points you're making. This article is interesting because it talks about the point of learning English. It cites there's a section in Preach My Gospel about learning your mission language, and there's one subsection called Learn English. If you do not speak English, you should study it as a missionary. This will bless you during your mission and throughout your life. Learning English will enable you to help build the Lord's kingdom in additional ways and will be a blessing for you and your family. Many of the suggestions found in the chapter will help you. Some of the verbiage there is kind of interesting, though. Like it's essentially implying if you learn English, and it'll help you build the Lord's kingdom in additional ways. Like it's basically saying you have a better chance of serving in the church and other capacities down the line if you
Yeah.
learn English. I.e., if you can learn English, you might have a higher likelihood of becoming a general authority. Like it's
Or even just a bishop.
or even a bishop. I mean, I think it's truly implying that. But I
Yeah.
am with you. I think there's great value practically of learning English. Of course, the church does a lot of work in English at the same time, and many large scale organizations like how they still have a
Yeah.
main language. Sure, multinational corporations might have people speaking different languages. That's the point because they want to function in different countries around the world, and you need native speakers for those languages. But you better believe top executive meetings, if they're U.S. based or whatever, are probably still in English. Like this is not abnormal just for the church.
Yeah.
So like I totally get it. At the same time, I know there's lots of promises made and things that you'll be able to hear the gospel in your own language. So you'll be able to worship in your language, and you should be able to worship in your own language, perhaps with no expectation that you learn the mother tongue of HQ.
That's right.
And and
Yeah,
and so
it's a
like I
very corporate kind of sounding policy, isn't it?
yeah, but I like what you said. The point is like the prophet, of course, can't be expected to learn every language. Our current prophet, notwithstanding, who actually has far
Yeah.
better language abilities than most.
Yeah.
Uh, that all makes complete sense. It does make me wish a little bit like I loved that stretch with President Monson when only for two different conferences they allowed speakers to speak in their native tongue if they were doing it, and the
Hmm.
rest of us got subtitles. I've long found it interesting they experimented with that, then clearly dropped the idea.
Yeah.
but for me, that worked. I thought to
Yes.
myself, it's not hurting me to read. I get it. It's okay. Okay, fine. If my kids are watching and they don't read well enough yet, if they're too young, maybe they're not getting enough from it, whatever. But how
Yeah.
much more valuable is it to show them, like, yeah, this this wonderful person speaking right now,
Doesn't speak English.
no, is from Bolivia, and they're speaking in
Yeah.
Spanish to us because that's their native language, and that's how they're comfortable expressing themselves in the gospel. And I think
Yeah.
that's great. I mean, it was just like I was in a ward council meeting at one point, and we had someone there who was a counselor in one of the presidencies there because the president wasn't there. Asked when if this individual could pray, said, "Sure, but it's okay if I do it in Spanish. I'd be more comfortable that way." And like, sure, of course, who wouldn't be happy to accommodate that? But you
Yeah.
remember this, like, hey, this is someone who's lived in the States for decades, but at the end of the day, that person is still more comfortable in the native tongue when it comes to things as
Yeah.
sensitive and dear to the heart as worship. And I don't think
Yeah.
anyone's dissuading people from that, but I could understand sort of the idea that, well, is there kind of a wink and a nod like learn English? Yes, it will benefit you professionally. It will benefit you throughout your life to learn English. It might benefit you as far as church service. I get it. I think you and I both, I think we're very much on the same page here.
Yeah. I think
Um,
there's another point that of context for this, and that is to remind ourselves that probably Latter Day Saints as a, a community in the United States have done more language training of non-English languages than any other population in the country.
mhm.
And so I think we need to put this policy encouraging non US based, non English speakers to learn English in the context of we have asked Latter day Saints around the world to learn a second language. And for the folks in the United States, that second language is obviously not English. And so we're doing both. We're not just asking
Yeah.
non-Americans to learn English. So I think
No, of
it's
course
just
not.
a good bit of context for this discussion because
Yeah, yeah.
it,
There's a lot of points in this article. This article's over at Times and Seasons, and there's a lot of thoughtful points to look into. One that had stuck out at me real quick
Mhm.
was the idea of how we use social media, especially because, I mean, think about this. I served my mission in Spain, and there are mission groups on Facebook. The mission groups, even though we served in Spain, the mission groups are moderated or whatever, largely by like American missionaries. All the work that's essentially done, the comments are in English on the page about a mission in Spain. And
Mhm.
essentially, even the native Spanish speakers who might still join the group are commenting in English to everyone else. And when you think about that, that is kind of like a hilarious irony. I mean, this is a group for missions in Spain. Shouldn't everything we're doing just be in Spanish on principle, just because
Yeah,
of how it was? Uh, but we don't because the lion's share of the missionaries who served there were Americans and are now speaking English normally throughout their lives. And that is the language they're interacting with on Facebook for the most part. And, you see how, the dominoes kind of fall in that sense. But it's worth just remembering some of these things and being kind of sensitive to them. The one thing I worry about, of course, is the church stressing how we're not an American church. But then I see the optics of, yeah, but you're going to want to learn like American English to kind of be able to roll with this. And if you become a general authority, you might have to become a U.S. citizen. But that's more for the practicalities of travel. But still, like
yeah,
Uchtdorf of course. Then again, I think the German passport gets you into more places now than an American passport does when they do those
yeah.
rankings of passports and how
Oh,
good they
really?
are. For
Okay.
example, yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's a topic for another time.
Yeah,
You can
that's
go more
cool.
places because if you're an American, can't go to North Korea, But if you're like a passport, I mean, the church has a lot to do in North Korea. Apparently, we got to open it up.
Yeah,
Got to get in.
yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Um,
Well,
let's see. I guess this next one's on me. Cool news coming out of the Gambia. You might remember a few months ago we talked about this tiny country in Africa. Devin, I know you're aware of African nations. This is
yes.
a bigger
I've
part of
never
who
been
you
to
are.
Gambia, but I've been to a few.
And I think a few people probably have been to Gambia. If you look at a map in far West Africa, kind of like, on the Western Africa, it kind of curves down, kind of concave like that. Like it swings down through
Hmm.
Morocco, almost flattens out so the coast is perfectly aligned, east west, then swings down so it faces south along the Gulf of Guinea and all that, and all those countries there, Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, all that kind of stuff, and going all the way to Nigeria. So Gambia is like right there in the middle, and it's completely surrounded by Senegal. like many things in Africa, its borders are the result of European colonialism, in that the French colonized what is now Senegal, and the British took everything along the Gambia River, just the river, which is why we have the Gambia today. So this basically, I think I've can't look at this. If you look it up, it's pretty nuts. Like the entire country, I think at its maximum width doesn't go more than like 20 miles one way or the other from the river itself for the whole country.
Yeah.
It's a little windy little finger of a country. Back in February, Elder Christofferson dedicated the country for the work of the gospel. And the church just announced in the past week that the first branch has been organized in the Gambia. I don't know if, and it's in Banjul, which is the capital city. But they organized this branch on June 10th with a handful of local members, and I just think it's super cool this is happening. The Gambia is a overwhelmingly Muslim country. You know, it's kind of past that line, that cultural line in Africa, where things switch from being majority Christian to majority Muslim. And so I think it's all the more interesting, of course, when the church can thrive and have government recognition. I don't know every in and out of what the government is letting us do, but organize a branch and hopefully have the members there be free to worship as they may, which is awesome. Good for them.
Yeah. That is fascinating. Fascinating. Well, it's a little bit relevant to at least jump into. I thought the church did a great job, or not the church, the Tribune, Salt Lake Tribune did a great story about the church in Egypt, and I thought it was written by Peggy Fletcher Stack, who I think of as a friend, a great journalist. She's been covering the church for the Tribune for something like 30 years. And it's just a fascinating story about the one LDS branch in Cairo. And, kind of the ebbs and flows, tying it
Yeah.
to politics and revolution. And at one point, at the smallest, they said there were just 3 members who attended. The smallest meeting during one of these periods of violence in recent years. But it's been as big as 90 people, and it has persisted there for, what did it say? Decades. I can't remember how long, but it's been many decades
It's
that
been a
it's
long
been
time.
there.
I mean, the
Yeah,
article mentions, Orson Hyde stopped in there when he was traveling to dedicate the Holy Land, but he did not organize a branch or anything like that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's very interesting. What fascinates me about this in particular, and the article mentions, like, we don't have official recognition in Egypt. There are other Christian denominations, and the thing you have to remember, Egypt is about 10% Christian. The overwhelming
Yeah.
majority are Coptic Christians, but there are other Christian movements in the country as well. As far as I'm not the authority on this in terms of how much regulation there might be on the Christian side, but when your country is 10% Christian and has a lengthy tradition of Coptic Christianity, I think
Hmm.
you have a little bit of political weight behind you. Even if the rest of the country is, about 90% Sunni Muslim,
Yeah.
you're throwing your weight around a little bit more than if you're a tiny minority of, like, 0.5% of the country might be some minority religion. So it is interesting
Right.
to me that
Right.
the church hasn't grown beyond that. It's cool that we have a branch there,
Yeah.
but it seems like we have at least some fertile ground for Christianity in the first place within Egypt.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to see more happen along that. This is a fun article, and it's pretty good length too.
Yeah. It's a long piece. Clearly, Peggy and her husband Michael, who is a brilliant and professional photographer and took the pictures for the article, went there to do the
Yeah.
story. And so this is a meaty piece, uh, great piece.
Well worth your read, folks. Some of you I know
Yeah,
some of you
yeah,
listeners will say, like, well, it's from the Trib, so I won't read it because the Trib has it out for the church, or yada yada yada. This is the kind of stuff that's really interesting, and you can see the church making, or Deseret News doing a piece on something similar, but it
hmm,
would have a little more fluff to it, probably,
yeah,
inevitably. This
yeah,
is good. I don't think this is just like a very matter of fact approach to the church's history in Egypt, what's going on, what could be
yeah,
going on, et cetera, and what hurdles we face. I think
yeah,
it's awesome. And that's one thing
yeah,
I love Deseret News, but they don't often write about, like, the hurdles we'll face other than, just like getting more faith and things like that. Like, this is
yeah,
like talks about the real issues because we don't want to poke the
yeah,
government and have them not back us up.
yeah, yeah. You're
It's
right.
a cool
You're
article,
right.
Devin. I'm glad you found this one. Well, we're going
Yeah.
to leave you this week with some interesting news out of Mexico. Service missions in Mexico are doubling to, quote, meet current needs. Unclear what exactly that means, what the current needs could be, but out of the church's Mexico newsroom, we have learned that the area presidency for Mexico is now doubling from 3 service mission areas to 6 to cover the whole country. You've got Northwest Mexico, Northeast Mexico, West Mexico, Central, East, and then Southeast Mexico. And the geography is just kind of divvied up in whatever way makes sense for that, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
But it's cool that they're doing this. I mean, the 6 service areas overlap the existing 32 teaching missions. I love the point of this is I love the church is going out of its way to illustrate that service missions aren't just like missionaries who are just in the same boundaries as the proselytizing mission, for example. It's its own entity in many ways, doing different things. And also the article goes out of its way to stress that missionaries called as service missionaries go through the same process to receive their mission calls as other young missionaries around their world. Their calling is determined through inspiration by a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and consultation with the applicant's stake presidents. You might remember this a few years ago. The church announced this subtle shift, but a very important one, because we've often had real missions, proselytizing missions, and then service missions are something you do if you can't do the proselytizing mission. We're trying to get away from that and give a lot of weight to the value of a service mission. It could be different. You often still live at home. You might still have a regular job. You do different things, but it is still a mission with a mission president. You still fill out papers. You go through all the same things because you are to be considered a missionary in the fullest sense of the word. It's just that your focus is on a different area than strictly teaching the gospel to others. I think that's great.
Yeah.
And we've got to lean on that and do everything we can not to stigmatize other types of missions. They're all missions. They're all missions, and they're all honorable.
Yeah, that is so good. And we've got a service missionary in our ward, and it is inspiring to see the work that he's doing. He's a very good young man, and really a credit to this kind of effort. And it's great to think about doubling the number of service missionaries in Mexico, to give more people this opportunity. So it's great. Yeah, it's great.
The one thing I wish they would change, we actually had a service missionary visiting our ward a few weeks ago, and I noticed the tag looked like a regular missionary tag, a regular quote unquote missionary tag, but then in smaller text under their name, it said service missionary. Now, I think that's a fine identifier. But when we do things like that, it still implies that the regular tag is like the missionary tag for those missionaries, and the other ones require a little addendum to indicate what they are. I think it's like you've got to just have it with no extra identifier, or you have other people's tags say like teaching missionary, proselytizing missionary, whatever it might be, so that every different type of mission is appropriately represented, so it is equitable for everyone. Otherwise, there's a little bit of a caste system at play. You got
Oh, that's good. Good point.
Thank you, Devin.
I totally agree.
Well, Devin, I totally agree that you're a swell fella. And everyone, if you want to follow Devin on his adventures, he's really been ramping up his EV channel, his solar living channel on YouTube, which is My Solar Trailer of Love.
It's oursolartrailer.com. Oursolartrailer.com. It's our solar electric trailer journey on YouTube. And but yeah, it's been a fun thing. One thing I noticed, Jeff, you and I love this TWIM thing, because you and I, our episodes are always longer. We always talk longer when we do it, which I think is great. I hope our guests, our audience doesn't mind. But
do I love it? I don't know. Do I love it? It's been 13 years.
Yeah,
Who knows?
Yeah,
Who knows what love is? What is love? Yeah. Baby, don't hurt me.
You love it. I love it. I'm glad you invite me to help you out with this occasionally.
Well, I appreciate you being on, Devin. It's good to have you on. And we hope you've enjoyed it, folks. Of course, you can support us on Patreon if you want to help us keep the lights on in an inflationary world where that is becoming more difficult day in and day out. Please go to Patreon and find us there. Become part of the team. So please support Devin. Thanks for listening, everybody. We hope you have a terrific week until we meet again, and happy July and all that good stuff. We're going to have Pioneer Day soon, and it'll be our annual I Hate Pioneer Day episode. So that's always going to be great. Something to look forward to.
We'll look forward to it.
Devin, thanks for being here, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, folks, for listening to TWIM, and we will catch you on the flip side. Have a great week. Bye-bye.